Why I want to go on camera is because I am sick and tired of being afraid to talk about something that should be no more difficult to talk about than cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, because it's just as, if not more common, and has devastating consequences for people who are driven underground because they're afraid to talk about it.
It's been a huge struggle, and this year I'm not on medication for the first time in 14 years, and it has been absolutely phenomenal. It's really nice to have my brain back and to be able to feel again and to actually just live life.
I'm here because it's tough to be judged for being different.
Yo adoro ser como yo soy, así, explosiva, risueña, loca, súper extrovertida, la más del grupo, el alma de la fiesta, lo que sea. Yo te lo digo, yo volvería a nacer igual, bipolar.
En el fondo, al final del día, como que me siento enferma, ¿tú entiendes?
I know that the way I portray myself, and part of the reason why this is such a big deal for me, doing this interview with you, is because, like I said, I have a facade that I exit my apartment and I wear.
Nobody knows exactly what bipolar disorder is, but bipolar disorder can tell you some things about what it looks like. People with bipolar disorder are prone to have mood problems, and very severe ones for some people. This recurs, usually over the course of a lifetime, and for some people it gets worse over the course of a lifetime. They have depression, where they lose motivation and pleasure and are sad and have trouble thinking and acting. And they can also have what is called mania, where you could argue that they have too much motivation and pleasure, and they might be grandiose, and they might do all sorts of wild things and get in big trouble. Or they can have times when they have some features of both depression and mania at the same time. The hallmark of bipolar disorder is being manic. That's tricky because the diagnosis of bipolar disorder has a paradox in it. Most people with bipolar disorder get depressed before they ever get manic. Yet, to have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, you have to be manic, or at least have a mild form of mania. So you see what the trouble is. It can be a long time before somebody with bipolar disorder has their first mania. The susceptibility to substance use is part of bipolar disorder, and the susceptibility to severe anxiety is part of bipolar disorder. It's not just depression and mania.
In the 14 years that I was on medication, I also was very into drinking and using drugs. And since I've been off of medication, it hasn't been an issue. There are lots of studies to say that the comorbidity rate of bipolar disorder and drug use is through the roof. And to me it's like, okay, well, how many of those patients are on medication? How many of them are actually making behavioral changes? How many of them are actually making lifestyle changes?
It can be a two-edged sword. They can get the best, they can have this great flush of creativity, this rush of creativity, but then on the other hand, they can feel the extreme low. It can feel like a curse when you're very depressed.
There's been big strides in studying how the brain works. For example, there's neuroimaging, which is very elegant. We can look at the living brain and see how it reacts to stuff. Thing that 20 or 30 years ago, people would have thought it was some kind of science fiction world what we can do. But that hasn't given us the answer either. So imaging is right now not of any use for diagnosis, but it's a useful way to study the illness. Like every other human endeavor, medicine, we get stuck in trends and fads and stuff like that. And so in some circles, bipolar disorder is a diagnosis of the hour, and people say everybody gets diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and if you don't have bipolar disorder, you're kind of an outsider probably, because everybody goes to parties and talks about their bipolar disorder. It's terrible to be a psychiatrist at a party like that.
I will end my misery. I will end my misery. I will end my misery. These roads to me turn into an angel.
What did you hear? Oh, no. Priestess.
Born and raised in New York City in a Catholic family, Sophia Wynne lived with both parents until their divorce when she was 10 years old, as one older brother and one younger sister. At school, she was always excelling, considered a fast learner. Very artistic, discovered her passion for drawing and painting at an early age. Used to work for design companies, denied legal problems. Her parents live close by, and though they are supportive, they contact her only sporadically. Mother has a history of migraines and had an episode of depression during her divorce. Father has severe COPD and had a myocardial infarction at early age. No psychiatric diagnosis, no family history of substance abuse. Cervical dysplasia. Ms. Wynne reports that she was close to alcoholism between 18 to 21 years old. She was drinking every weekend a bottle of vodka on her own while partying with friends. She stopped this behavior on her own after having a bleeding peptic ulcer, did not attend any rehabilitation program or receive counseling. She claims to have stopped binge drinking since then. Ms. Wynne reports that she was doing well until age 21. She was always involved in many activities of various interests, would get a lot of stuff done in short periods of time, and would still manage to sleep only 3 to 4 hours to have extra time to devote to some of her projects. People would call her Mighty Mouse and envy her energetic personality. First diagnosed with major depressive disorder at age 21 when hospitalized after feeling depressed and having difficulty sleeping, suicidal ideations, decreased interest and energy for a month. She received inpatient treatment and continued outpatient treatment for 1 year. The medications seemed to be helping her recover, and after a year of treatment, she felt, quote, quite close to my real self. Thus, she stopped taking the medications. She decided to take some time off to relax, but things didn't change and her involvement in pleasurable activities became a problem as she was spending a lot of money without even considering the consequences. 2 years of feeling like this were enough to get her in serious financial trouble. For the next 3 years, she worked very hard to recuperate financially and to rebuild the trust of many people around her that were affected by her poor decision making. During the evaluation, she reports feeling sad about things she has been seeing in the news and feeling that she needed to do something to help. She believes God sent her for that purpose and she felt her mission. Strongly believes in the angelic nature of her being and endorses feeling very depressed for being so passive when I had so much power. She talks very fast, not allowing anyone else to talk, is crying and covers her face. Her chief complaint is, "I will end my misery and this world's misery when I turn into an angel again." Miss Sophia Wynne is a 29-year-old, biracial, single female admitted involuntarily to a psychiatric ward, verbalizing ideas of jumping from a highway overpass. Feels guilty but denies wanting to die and claims that jumping will bring back her wings.
I think I was stressed out and I hadn't slept for like weeks. I just want to go home and go on with my life. I just want to go home.
What if somebody does cross over that line between personality and illness? Is it because they have sort of mild bipolar disorder and they're lucky? Or is it that there's no relationship and that some people are vivacious or, mercurial and some people are not?
For people to think that we're all just supposed to be at this monotone hum is pathetic.
Lately, particularly in Europe, there's a lot of attention paid to something called temperament. And so the idea that someone is a certain way and that that's related to how their brain works. And it may be that people with certain temperaments are susceptible to bipolar disorder or other illnesses, or it may be that the temperament is a mild form of the illness. There's no way to know one way or the other. People with bipolar disorder have a very strong propensity towards impulsivity. Of course, you can be impulsive when you're manic, and then it's real clear, but there's also subtle increase in impulsivity when someone's not manic. And if someone is both depressed and impulsive, that can be actually a very treacherous time, because then all the ideas that are knocking around in your brain are negative ideas, and there is not much inhibiting your actions, and so depression and impulsivity is a dangerous situation in bipolar disorder. You could also see, well, like anything else, there's a good side to a little bit of impulsivity, because it means that you can be more likely to get outside the box a little bit. So impulsivity, we think of it as being bad because it can get people in big trouble. You do something that you weren't even able to think about, and it gets you in trouble for the rest of your life. But in a little milder form, it can also probably help you, make you a little more flexible and creative.
There are so many people that have changed the world. You know, the one person that says monotone is not enough. Why not make a circle? And then why not put the circle on the back of a cart that a horse pulls? That we break that which is normal by thinking differently and creating the world we live in.
People who have bipolar illness do tend to be often more intelligent. Certainly anecdotally, and of my patients too, they engage in more creative endeavors generally.
I don't know anyone with bipolar disorder or who has been diagnosed as bipolar that isn't in some capacity creative.
I think that if somebody were to look at one of these temperament scales and they were to look at a question and say, what does being the life of the party have to do with an illness? I would have to agree with them. You know, being the life of the party may just have to do with the fact that somebody is spontaneous and somebody is clever. And I think we make a big mistake when we confuse personality traits with illnesses, because we wind up making everything into illnesses, and that's just not the way to live. So there's this question about the extent to which mental illness or psychiatric illnesses are social constructs, saying that, well, maybe it's because somebody's behavior or feelings or something is outside the social norms, and that's not tolerated. I think that's a very tempting idea. I don't think it's true.
The whole sort of psychiatric pharmaceutical complex, medical complex, is both a help and a hindrance to changing attitudes. You know, they've created a monster, in a sense. Not always intentionally, but there is now a social construct that exists around every notion, every concept of mental illness. It's become divorced from people's individual experiences.
Show me what normal looks like, you know? Well, what is normal? What is average? There's always outliers. There's always somebody who has something somewhere in some facet of their personality or behavior or mood that is just a little off kilter.
It's kind of like global warming. Is the Earth really warming? You know, is mental illness real? Is it an actual thing? Or is it just attitude, you know, perspective? Is it something we should be treating, or is it simply, you know, a dimension on a continuum of personality?
There's an interesting test that a friend of mine who's interested in this very thing, once applied. He says, if somebody has a real illness, that means that if they were on a desert island and there were no other people, they would still have trouble, right? People that have severe bipolar disorder, if they were on a desert island, they would still have trouble. They would still be depressed, and when they were depressed, they would not be able to function, and they would not be able to get food. You know, it would be a very bad situation. If they were manic, they'd also get in trouble because they would think that that tiger can't hurt me, you know. So this is a desert island illness.
Maybe it's biological, maybe it's nature, maybe it's nurture, maybe it's both, maybe it's neither. On some level, absolutely a social construct. Does that make it any less real? Could we call it something else? Could we call it petunia disorder? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Many people who, quote unquote, appear bipolar are extremely gifted and talented and creative. Regardless of whether they're diagnosed with bipolar or not, they are ahead of their time because they're already creating original works and doing interesting things in their life. Maybe part of the reason why they get there is because they have these manic times, and that pushes them to these creative places.
If you look at people with bipolar disorder who are creative or artists, they will tell you that when they accomplish things, it's not when they are having the symptoms of their illness. It's when their illness is relatively under control.
Often the mania, like a drug, like cocaine, can be very seductive. You can feel, so you feel euphoric.
I just walk and I look at things and I see colorations that are far more vivid than I think, are necessarily there. I don't know.
The epiphany or the revelation or the insight that individuals with mania feel, they suddenly feel that the world is brighter, it's vibrating with energy. Their faces can glow. But there is a problem because you can have excessive involvement in pleasurable activities that can be very risky. So you can go on buying sprees and spend more money than you actually have, or have sexual indiscretions.
Que un dolor emocional que se va convirtiendo en físico.
It can be very frightening. You get to a point where if you're having certain images that are unusual or strange or new to you, and they can be extremely frightening or terrifying to you. Or you can start to think, your grandiosity is so great that you'll go out and think that you can stop traffic because you have the power to stop the motion of the cars. One often doesn't see mania without the depression. They kind of go together, the different sides of the same coin.
Sometimes I think I know depression better than I know anything else.
You can have fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, inappropriate guilt.
Yo no era nada, yo era una mierda y pasaba 3 días durmiendo.
Self-recrimination, self-reproaches, diminished ability to concentrate, indecisiveness.
Y fue terrible, o sea, me vino esa angustia y esa desesperación.
And then also recurrent thoughts of death and suicide would come with the depression.
Horrible, la verdad, porque ya te metes en un túnel, oscuro, 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 así. No tienes cómo regresar.
It's a wall, it's a barrier. When depression sets in, everything is an obstacle. Everything is a barrier to moving forward.
No estoy contenta porque yo no creo en la felicidad.
Most people with bipolar disorder are suffering. They do not have an illness that makes them more creative. They have an illness that ruins their life.
Creativity would be the ability to take one's own life experiences, the world around them, and put them together in a way that no one else has ever done.
La creatividad es un fenómeno realmente desconocido.
There have been many cases of artists who had a great deal of creative output when probably in a manic phase or a hypomanic phase. They've not lost it completely, but they have all this increased energy, focus, clarity of thought, and they're making connections. So in that moment, they could actually be very, very creative.
Whether or not having artistic personality makes them more prone to having, say, a bipolar disorder. I think the answer is yes and no. I think yes, it can put them more at risk because they're more vulnerable because they pick up things more than other people. But I wouldn't want to say that that's the only thing because I think it might make being an artistic personality make them stronger in certain ways.
There is a passionate obsession, a need to complete something, a vision.
Being visionary is somewhat akin to being slightly bipolar.
They're sort of following in the footsteps, standing on the shoulders of mad giants, and there's sort of a history that begets a history.
Cuando tiene como trasfondo un trastorno bipolar, por decir, lo que hace simplemente es variar, salir con otros matices.
The occasional person who has bipolar disorder and is talented, you could argue that in order to overcome what you have to overcome if you have bipolar disorder, that the person who is able to do that must really be exceptionally talented. If you're going to make it in spite of your illness, you got to be damn good.
You know, maybe people with certain kinds of brain characteristics are drawn to certain kind of expression in, because they're trying to find ways to deal with their, their thinking and their emotional lives.
Because of what we have to go through and having to compensate for being or feeling left out or feeling not part of, or knowing that we're different and knowing that we have to still get along, it makes us more in tune with other methods of expression.
Como tú eres artista, tú puedes convertir esos demonios, tú lo puedes volver arte. O sea, en palabras freudianas, sublimizarlo, hacer una realidad grotesca, algo admirable.
Yet we do see many artists that if you look at their lives, it looks like maybe they had bipolar disorder, like Van Gogh, is the everybody talks about. Of course, he may have also had temporal lobe epilepsy, or he may have had digitalis toxicity, or there's a zillion things that he might have had.
I think Van Gogh is a great example because when you look at his brushstrokes, they're so urgent, they're so frantic. He is undoubtedly a genius for his passion.
Los expertos hablan de que esos trazos así fuertes y voluminosos y sumamente expresivos fueron inducidos por su enfermedad.
Did he know when he was painting that he was not right? Can we really say he was bipolar? Can we say he was an alcoholic and that pushed him into depressions that he wouldn't otherwise have had?
Like cutting off one's ear. It's pretty extreme behavior.
There's such a huge spectrum to try to understand an individual.
And you have this relatively small number of people that have the whole thing, bipolar disorder, and they are very unfortunate. Because even though they can have rich, good lives, they have these severe mood symptoms, which are quite a challenge to overcome. The reward for that is this larger number of people that share some of their genetic characteristics, perhaps, who are more creative or more able or more enterprising, perhaps, than the average person. And so the person who has bipolar disorder is paying a genetic cost for these people who don't have as much of the genetics of the illness. It looks kind of like that, but there's no proof for that. There's this question about if you treat bipolar disorder, does that do away with the potential creativity that may come with the illness? And there's a lot of expressions like that, like, people say, well, what would have happened if Vincent van Gogh would have had Depakote? He would have had a happier life and not killed himself, but we wouldn't have had those paintings.
So I started meds when I was 14. I was first put on Wellbutrin because that was what my mother was on, is still on, works for her.
Tengo miedo a dejarlo. Le tengo pánico a eso. Pero pánico, es un miedo.
I and millions of other people can swear that medication saved our lives. Saved our lives.
There have been the anti-psychiatry movements. In England, for example, R.D. Laing and others, Thomas Szasz here in America, who opposed, medication. It worked to some degree, but it wasn't supported over time by the culture.
To take medication for a headache, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heartburn, this is okay. But for the organ of the brain that controls our nervous system, that sometimes goes haywire, not okay. Not okay, culturally speaking. That has to change.
This question about whether treatment of bipolar disorder reduces creativity of creatively talented people with bipolar disorder is one which has come up a lot.
I even had a therapist that I interviewed once that she was like, oh yeah, that's normal when you're on medication. I've had several patients that have to take notes when they read. I'm like, no, that's not normal, and that's just obscene that you're like okay with that. And it's because you take a pill. And it's just like, that's kind of infuriating.
Nobody would necessarily think that there's anything wrong with the doctor's pill.
Yo le he peleado con la doctora, deme algo para la memoria, deme algo que me active el cerebro, porque yo siento que yo no estoy dando 100% de lo que yo debería.
Being on medication for 14 years, it's been really, it's been a trip, man.
And somebody with bipolar disorder who is artistic and who is in the category of people who needs to be a little manic in order to be their most productive, their treatment can be a very subtle balance. It can keep somebody out of trouble and keep them from being too depressed, but can let somebody have, they call it hypomania. When somebody is not all the way to being manic, where they're delusional and they got to go talk to the president and stuff, but where they have more energy and they don't need so much sleep.
The idea that a person might need medication in order to have a productive life is very difficult for a lot of people to accept. It's particularly difficult for them to accept because they know what kind of culture they live in, and they know that they're going to get reamed for it, generally, if they decide to actually take medication. I mean, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
I mean, in my experience with medications, it doesn't help me feel like I belong at all. Just really fucks up my thinking.
And some of the non-medicine treatment might be psychotherapy, some kind of formal kind of psychotherapy, and some of it isn't. Some of it is more a matter of managing certain things about somebody's life.
Why would you, on a daily basis, sit in a room full of people who believe that they are damaged and broken and that they need something because they've been using drugs or alcohol or whatever, because there's 12 steps for everything these days, that they've been using something as a crutch. So now, instead of using that something as a crutch, they're going to use this program as a crutch. Why wouldn't you change your behavior? Why wouldn't you change your lifestyle? Why would you choose to sit every day for an hour every day and say, I'm fucked up, and I'm never gonna change that, but I'm gonna remind myself every day that I'm fucked up?
Most people probably have the maximum benefit from a combination of medicine treatment plus non-medicine treatment.
There have been another way to go? Maybe. Would I like to not take medication? Sure. Will I stop taking it? No.
Because this is, at best, and this is what I love about it, and this is what I love about the psychiatric community, at best this is a fucking guessing game. Like, as far as therapy and psychiatry goes, that's the way I view it. You are your own guinea pig. And they don't know, and the pharmaceutical company doesn't know, but hey, if they can make a buck off of you because Abilify is, what, $435 a month? Why not?
We have to wait until somebody has a depressive or manic episode before we can say they have bipolar disorder. And I think that's crazy. It's like, how do you tell that somebody has high blood pressure? Very easily. I just see if they've had a stroke or not. So that's the situation with bipolar. It's like, wait until somebody's had a stroke. If I had an illness and I later found out that nobody could tell that I had this illness until it almost killed me, I'd be a little frustrated with the state of modern medicine.
Pero en cuanto a los medicamentos, ya eso es algo muy químico, es algo muy inherente a mi organismo. A mí me da, de verdad, me da miedo. Que yo odio las recaídas, las crisis, yo le he pasado súper mal. Me pongo loca, que no sé nada de mí. Y es horrible. Y mi familia lo ha sufrido mucho. O sea, que la familia lo pasa muy mal.
Bipolar disorder is a lifelong illness. How do you treat the lifelong illness? There ought to be some way that if you knew what this mechanism was that made people susceptible to mania rather than mania, and if you knew why it was recurrent and why it seems to accelerate for some people but not everybody over time, and you could aim a treatment at that mechanism, then maybe you could treat somebody when they were in their teens and you wouldn't ever have to treat them again. You just never know. And somebody, you know, who is an artist or something like that, and so they have these concerns about treatment and creativity and what's the illness, they need to have a good psychiatrist who can be a little flexible about treatment perhaps, but can also be firm about it when it's necessary.
How many of the doctors actually follow up? How many psychiatrists that you've seen see you for longer than 15 minutes? If you're providing an antipsychotic or an antidepressant or a mood-changing drug, don't you think maybe you'd want to talk to the person you were giving it to? Just a thought.
Hay que tener los ojos bien abiertos y uno saber cuándo se debe dejar al genio loco que llevamos dentro que se exprese o cuando ese loco quiere destruirnos.
The future things may change in any direction, and so you got to be careful not to close off options for yourself. And there's lots of medicines out there besides Seroquel, and there's lots of medicines out there besides Lamictal, and there's lots of things out there that can help you besides medicine.
A couple of years ago, I had made a decision that I promised myself that I was going to live authentically, honestly. I wasn't going to, you know, no more pretending that things weren't the way they really were, and that I was going to come out, as it were. I was going to live my life without any secrets, and that's easier said than done.
Bipolar disorder runs in families. If somebody has bipolar disorder, the chance of their child having bipolar disorder is about 1 in 5, 1 in 4, which is 10 times what it is for the normal population. So people come in here and ask, because I have bipolar disorder, should I not have children? I think that's a really interesting question. My gut answer to that is no, you should have kids, because of 2 reasons. The first is that for most people, the treatment of bipolar disorder is much more effective than it was a generation ago. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that if a parent has bipolar disorder, on average, you know, they have 4 kids, one of them's going to have the illness. So how about the other 3? They're going to be first-degree relatives of bipolars. Those are the lucky people. So, I mean, this sounds kind of funny, but it's true. And if your child is awesome, it doesn't matter whether he has bipolar disorder or not. You know, I mean, awesome is awesome. If you look at people with bipolar disorder, on average, and of course, artistic people are not average, they're exceptional. But if you look on average at people with bipolar disorder, they have a hard time. It's a very hard illness to overcome. It's amazing to me the courage and perseverance that our patients with bipolar disorder have.
If you look at the plethora of films, Jackson Pollock, A Beautiful Mind, there's a Van Gogh film, and probably plenty of other films that explore mental illness, that those films scare people. And if you dissect each one of them, they don't end well. And it's uncomfortable to think that you're in the presence of someone that could harm themselves or others.
But I wouldn't judge those who really feel obliged to remain silent. They know better than I do what the consequences of coming out are, because the consequences can be catastrophic.
When we can diagnose bipolar disorder without having to wait until somebody has had an episode, then we can answer these questions about personality. And we can say, well, Is it just that some people just have personalities and that's just the way we are? And that's only coincidentally related to bipolar disorder? And then on top of that, there's a few people with bipolar disorder and they also may have personality things, or is there some relationship? Can't tell that now, because there's no good way to tell who has bipolar disorder.
Everybody has their moments. Some people just have more of them. And for some of us, those moments are more protracted and perhaps more debilitating.
They should learn about the illness so they can learn how to live with it and keep it out of their way so that they can live their life. We've come up to the place where we've gone maybe as far as we can with the kind of treatments that we have. And we're going to have to think about what are the brain mechanisms that we really need to be aiming at. Our treatments are all aimed at episodes. You know, why are you looking for your keys under the street light? Well, because I can see here, you know, and you can see mania, you know, and so it's something big. And you can treat mania, you can see when it goes away.
I feel terrible for those people. I feel sad. I feel empathy and compassion for people who suffer alone and in silence.
I've had patients that have complained about their treatment. They've said that they feel like it's changed who they are. And if they are very creative, I think that there's a lot of fear when it comes to that diagnosis and treatment. Will it change who I am? Will it stop what makes me special?
If you're lucky enough to be creative and have creative abilities, they can use that. That can make hypomania or mania into a catalyst for increased creativity. Only a small percentage of people with bipolar disorder have that situation.
It's nice to be able to actually let your guard down sometimes and to really be who you are and not be ashamed of it and not have any regret. And I don't actually have any regret about anything I've ever done in my entire life at all. Because without any of those experiences, I wouldn't be who I am and where I am today. You know, and I'm really very happy about where I am today.
As a society, we have to be compassionate and accept that people are in pain and suffering and be supportive. But there's no way to do that right now. Because we don't have that. We don't live in that kind of a world. We don't live in that culture.